Welcome to Momentum Mind, where we turn powerful ideas into action and transform the way you think about success, growth, and everyday momentum. In today's journey, we're diving deep into a story that will not only change how you see challenges but also give you the tools to take control of your mind, your habits, and your life. So grab your headphones, clear your mind, and let's step into a world where ideas become action, and momentum becomes unstoppable. Chapter 1. The trembling voice. The city was alive with noise, footsteps clattering on the sidewalks, trolleys ringing in the distance, the endless hum of people in motion. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to be going somewhere important, except for Daniel. He stood still on the corner, clutching a wrinkled piece of paper that smelled faintly of ink and coffee. His name was printed on it, applicant, Daniel M. Carter. Beneath that, a single line that made his stomach twist: prepare a short speech for tomorrow's interview. He'd been waiting for a chance like this for months, an opening at one of the city's biggest firms. But now, faced with the simple task of speaking aloud, his confidence melted like frost under sunlight. Talking to people had always been his quiet terror. Even in school, the sound of his own voice in front of others made his palms sweat and his throat close up. He found himself wandering down a narrow street lined with old brick buildings, searching for a distraction or maybe a miracle. That's when he noticed the sign. It was hanging above a door that looked as though it hadn't been painted in years. The words were faded, but still readable: the Academy of Public Expression, Instructor, Mr. C. Inside, the air smelled of chalk and old wood. A small stage stood at the far end, lit by a single flickering bulb. A man sat in the front row, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. His suit was rumpled, his hair graying, but his eyes, sharp and amused, followed Daniel as he entered. You look like someone who's about to either faint or make history, the man said. Daniel froze. I saw the sign. You thought maybe you could learn how to stop shaking before tomorrow. The man smiled knowingly. You've come to the right place. Name's Carnegie. Call me Mr. C. The name rang faintly familiar, but Daniel couldn't place it. Mr. C stood up, his voice carrying easily through the empty room. Everyone thinks public speaking is about words, he said. It's not. It's about courage. You can speak nonsense with courage and move people. Or you can speak truth with fear and move no one. He gestured toward the stage. Go on. Tell me about yourself. Daniel's heart pounded. His mouth felt dry as dust. He took one hesitant step forward, then another, until he stood under the dim light. His voice trembled when he began to speak. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm applying for a position at— Stop, Mr. C interrupted gently. You're not talking to me. You're talking to your fear. Daniel blinked. My fear. Exactly. You're trying to sound safe. But people don't listen to safety. They listen to honesty. Try again. Forget what sounds right, just speak as if you're talking to someone who truly needs to hear you. Daniel hesitated, his throat tightening again. Then something inside him, a faint spark, pushed him to try. My name is Daniel Carter, he said, louder this time. I've been looking for a chance to prove myself. And tomorrow? I can't afford to fail. Mr. C nodded slowly. There. That was human. That was real. He clapped once, the sound echoing off the walls. Lesson 1, speak from desire, not duty. People don't care about your nerves. They care about your need. Daniel felt something shift inside him, small, but unmistakable. Mr. C motioned for him to sit. I used to shake worse than you, he said with a chuckle. First time I spoke, I forgot my own name. But fear, he leaned closer, isn't your enemy. It's proof that you care. Your job is to make that care stronger than your fear. The old man stood, pacing slowly. Tomorrow, when you speak, I want you to picture one thing, not the audience, not yourself. Picture the reason you're there. Why does this matter to you? Daniel tried to answer, but the question stuck in his throat. He'd been so focused on not failing that he'd forgotten what success even meant. Mr. C seemed to read his thoughts. Find that answer, he said softly. When you do, your voice will find its power. As Daniel left the academy that night, the city lights shimmered through the fog like distant promises. He walked home with a faint echo of Mr. C's voice in his head, speak from desire, not duty. But as he reached his small apartment, his phone buzzed with a message from the firm. The interview time had changed. It was no longer tomorrow. It was in 2 hours. He froze at the doorway, the world spinning for a heartbeat. His heart pounded in his chest, louder, faster, unstoppable. He looked at his trembling hands, then at the city beyond the window. Somewhere out there, in a small classroom, a man had told him to face his fear and speak from desire, and now, there was no time left to prepare. Only time to act. Chapter 2, The Room of Many Eyes. The elevator trembled as it rose, its old metal frame creaking with every floor. Daniel's reflection in the mirrored panel looked like someone he didn't quite recognize, pale, tight-jawed, eyes wide with panic. The tie around his neck felt more like a rope than an accessory. He tried to breathe, slow and deep, but his chest refused to obey. All he could hear was the echo of Mr. C's voice in his mind, speak from desire, not duty. When the elevator doors opened, the sharp scent of coffee and polished wood filled the air. The firm's reception area was all glass and quiet authority, the kind of place where every whisper seemed to matter. Behind a long marble desk, a woman looked up with a professional smile. "Mr. Carter? They're ready for you." Her words struck like a gavel. He nodded weakly, wiped his palms on his trousers, and followed her down a corridor lined with paintings, stern men and women staring down from their frames, as if judging every step. The air felt heavier with each stride, the weight of expectation pressing against his back. The conference room door opened to reveal a long table surrounded by men in dark suits. Sunlight poured through tall windows, glinting off silver pens and glass water pitchers. "There must have been at least 10 of them, the room of many eyes, Mr. Carter," said the man at the head of the table, his tone clipped and cold. "You may begin when you're ready." "When you're ready." The words mocked him. He was never ready. He stood at the front of the room, feeling every gaze like a hand pressing against his chest. His mouth went dry. The paper in his pocket, the notes he'd written the night before, felt suddenly useless. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence stretched, sharp and unbearable. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else shifted in their chair. In that unbearable stillness, his mind screamed run, and then, faintly, beneath the roar of panic, he remembered Mr. C's question, "Why does this matter to you?" He closed his eyes for a second and saw his father's worn hands, the tired face that had smiled at him every morning despite the factory dust and long hours. He remembered his mother humming softly as she mended shirts by the window. He remembered the nights he promised himself he'd make their sacrifices worth it. When he looked up again, the room hadn't changed, but he had. "I want to tell you why I'm here," he said, his voice trembling but alive. "I didn't grow up with much. My parents worked harder than anyone I've ever known, and they taught me something I'll never forget, that your work means nothing if you don't put your heart in it. I want to be part of a company that still believes in that." The words weren't perfect. They weren't even planned. But they were real. Something in the room shifted. The eyes that had felt like daggers now looked almost curious. The man at the head of the table leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "Go on," he said, and Daniel did. He spoke of the projects he'd done, the mistakes he'd made, what he'd learned, what drove him to keep improving. The more he spoke, the more his fear melted into something else, not confidence exactly, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you forget yourself completely. When he finally stopped, the silence that followed was different, thoughtful, measured. The man at the head of the table nodded once. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he said. "We'll be in touch." The words could have meant anything. Rejection. Approval. Indifference. But as Daniel stepped out of the room, his chest felt lighter than it had in years. He made it to the elevator before his knees gave out. He laughed, half relief, half disbelief, as he pressed the button to the ground floor. Outside, the air felt cooler, fresher. The city's noise returned like an old friend. For the first time, he realized he hadn't died on that stage of polished wood and glass. He had survived. As he walked toward the street, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Not bad for a man who wanted to faint yesterday. Come back tonight. Class starts at dusk. Mr. C." Daniel stared at the message, feeling that familiar chill of curiosity. How had the man known about the interview? About the exact timing? He hadn't told him anything. He looked back at the street that led toward the academy, narrow, half forgotten, glowing faintly in the late afternoon light. Part of him wanted to go home, to collapse on the couch and let the fear fade away. But another part, the one that had spoken in that room of many eyes, whispered that this was only the beginning. He took a breath, straightened his jacket, and turned toward the fading sign at the end of the block, because for the first time, Daniel didn't just want to be heard. He wanted to learn how to make people listen, and as he disappeared down the narrow street, he couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. C had been expecting him all along. Chapter 3, The Mirror Room. The alley leading to the academy was narrower than usual, almost swallowed by shadows, and the sign above the door looked older, as if it had been hanging there a century. Daniel pushed it open, and a faint bell chimed. The smell of wood polish and old paper greeted him like an old friend. Inside, Mr. C waited. He was leaning against the stage rail this time, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the empty room as if it had secrets to tell. "You came back," he said, a trace of amusement in his voice. "Good. Courage is easier the second time, because the first time scares most men away." Daniel swallowed. I don't know if I did it right." "You don't get to decide right or wrong here," Mr. C said. "You get to decide if you show up. Right comes later. Now, come with me." He led Daniel down a hallway that smelled faintly of damp brick and candle wax. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors opened into a room lined wall-to-wall with mirrors. Floor to ceiling, the glass reflected everything: Daniel's trembling hands, the knot in his stomach, the slight slump of his shoulders. "This," Mr. C said, "is the mirror room. Your voice lives here. Your fear lives here. And the person you hide from, well, he lives here too." Daniel's stomach turned. He didn't like mirrors. They never showed the full picture, only fragments, lies that made him feel small and clumsy. But the room was quiet, almost sacred, and something about Mr. C's calm gaze kept him from running. "Step in," Mr. C said. "Now, tell me, what do you see?" Daniel hesitated. He saw himself, all of himself, but smaller. Shrunken by doubt, shadowed by fear, every imperfection highlighted tenfold. I see a man who freezes when it matters," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good," Mr. C said. "Admitting it is the first step. Now speak to him. Not to me. Not to some audience you imagine. Speak to him, the one staring back at you. Tell him what you want." Daniel shook his head. "I don't know what to say." "Then say this: I will not let fear rule me anymore." He swallowed, shaking, and the words left his lips. The voice sounded foreign, yet powerful, bouncing off the mirrors and multiplying until it felt like a chorus. He saw himself stiffen in the glass, and then, as if responding, his reflection straightened, eyes brightening. "Good," Mr. C said. "Now, speak as if that person in the mirror will listen to every word you say. Speak as if he can either follow you or vanish forever. Speak as if your life depends on it." Daniel closed his eyes. He pictured his father's worn hands again, his mother's gentle smile. He thought of the interview, the street, the empty conference room, the gaze of 10 skeptical eyes. And he spoke. Not with rehearsed words, not with fear, but with all the quiet determination he had carried through life without realizing it. Hours passed in that room, though Daniel could not tell if it had been minutes or days. He repeated phrases, short speeches, fragments of stories he wanted to tell the world. Each time, his reflection seemed to shift, smaller fears shrinking, confidence rising just enough to hold. Every line he spoke bounced off the mirrors and somehow returned to him, heavier and brighter than before. At one point, he stopped, gasping for breath, and realized he wasn't trembling as much. His voice, still raw, still unsure, had strength. There was a resonance he hadn't known he possessed. Mr. C was watching from the corner, arms crossed. "The mirror doesn't lie. It only shows what you refuse to see. And today, you've started seeing it. But don't be satisfied. Most men leave the mirror room and never come back. They think a day of courage is enough. It's not. Courage is practice. Courage is repetition. Courage is staring at yourself every day and speaking anyway." Daniel nodded, exhausted, but a spark of something wild had been lit inside him. He wasn't just practicing speech anymore, he was learning to confront himself. As he left the room, he noticed a small envelope on the stage. He picked it up, curious. Inside was a single slip of paper with a note in Mr. C's neat handwriting: "Tomorrow, you will not speak to empty walls or reflections. You will speak to people who are not afraid of judging you. Make them feel something." Mr. C. Daniel felt a cold thrill run down his spine. Something about the words hinted at a challenge he could not yet imagine. The mirror room had changed him, yes, but it had also left a question hanging in the air. Was he ready to speak when the stakes were real? He walked out into the city night, mirrors of windows reflecting neon signs and flickering streetlights. Somewhere out there, the world was waiting, and Daniel could feel that whatever came next, it would not be easy because the mirror room had shown him a truth he could no longer ignore. Speaking was never just about words. It was about courage. And courage demanded confrontation, not with others, but with the man in the reflection, staring back at him with eyes that dared to know whether he was truly ready. Chapter 4, The First Audience. The morning air had a crisp bite that made Daniel's lungs ache as he walked toward the academy. He'd spent the night replaying the mirror room over and over in his mind, each reflection whispering warnings and promises. His voice no longer felt like a stranger, but his confidence was still fragile, like glass balanced on a ledge. When he entered the academy, the classroom was alive with quiet anticipation. A small group of students had gathered, some with polished shoes, others with worn notebooks tucked under their arms. Their faces were calm, but Daniel could feel the subtle undercurrent of competition, the invisible measuring of abilities before a word was spoken. C stood at the front, leaning casually against the stage rail. "Today," he said, "you will meet your first audience." Daniel's stomach dropped. An audience. Not mirrors. Not empty walls. Real people, capable of noticing every flaw, every stumble, every hesitation. "You will speak for 5 minutes, Mr. C continued, his eyes scanning Daniel as though peering into the depths of his fear. "No notes. No paper. You will speak from your heart. Let the audience feel you. If you can do that, you will begin to understand what words can truly do." Daniel nodded, though his hand shook. He had no idea how he would manage it. He had always been taught to plan, to memorize, to deliver perfectly. But now, all he had was truth and courage, two fragile things he wasn't sure could survive in front of an audience. The first student went before him, a confident young woman with a clear, steady voice. She spoke about ambition and setbacks, her gestures smooth, her eyes sweeping across the room. Daniel felt a pang of envy, but also inspiration. If she could do it, maybe he could too. Then it was his turn. He stepped onto the stage, the wooden floor warm beneath his feet. The eyes of the room fixed on him like magnets, and his mouth went dry. He felt the familiar tremor rising from his chest, up through his throat, and out to his fingers, which curled around the edges of the stage. For a heartbeat, he thought of running, but then he remembered the mirror room. He remembered the voice that had grown stronger through repetition, the reflection that had straightened and watched him with anticipation rather than fear. He remembered his parents, the city streets, the interview room, the reason he was here. His voice wavered at first, but he took a breath, and something shifted. "I've spent my life watching people speak and wondering why I couldn't. I thought that being quiet would protect me. It didn't. Fear doesn't protect. Fear limits. And today, I want to try to speak, even if I'm afraid." There it was, honesty, raw and uneven. He could feel the eyes on him, the subtle lean forward, the quiet curiosity of people listening because they wanted to understand, not just judge. He spoke of small victories, of mistakes that had taught him more than success ever could. He spoke of ambition and struggle, of the nights he'd doubted himself and the mornings he had forced his feet out of bed anyway. His voice grew steadier as he went, each word carrying not just sound but weight, echoing in the minds of those who listened. And then something remarkable happened. The students leaned in, drawn by more than just words. They weren't waiting for a polished performance. They were waiting for truth. They were waiting for him. Daniel noticed it and felt a flicker of exhilaration. It was intoxicating. He had never realized that speaking could be like this, not a duty, not a recital, but a bridge between people, built out of honesty and courage alone. When he finally stepped down, the applause was polite but warm. A few students smiled, nodding as if to say, "We saw you." One older man in the back, who had barely moved his head through the speech, finally leaned forward and whispered something that Daniel couldn't quite hear. C clapped once, sharp and deliberate. "Well done." That was not perfection. That was something far rarer, authenticity. Remember, the world doesn't reward flawless speeches. It rewards hearts that are heard. Daniel tried to smile, but inside, a strange, new tension had taken hold. Speaking had felt liberating, yet terrifying. He had touched the power of words, but he also understood the weight they carried. Misstep here, hesitation there, the audience could feel it, and the bridge could crumble in an instant. As the class ended, Mr. C called him aside. "You're ready for more," he said. "But now comes the hardest part, learning to speak not just to ears, but to minds. To influence. To inspire. Tomorrow, you will face an audience who doesn't want to listen. And they will challenge you in ways you cannot yet imagine." Daniel's stomach sank. He had survived the first audience, but the challenge looming in his mind was heavier than any he had faced before. The fear of failing in front of those who resist, those who might mock or dismiss, felt larger than the fear he had conquered. Yet, beneath it, something else stirred, a spark he couldn't ignore. A quiet certainty that the first audience had shown him a glimpse of what was possible, and as he left the academy, the city hum buzzing around him like a living organism, he realized the truth he couldn't shake. The next audience would test him in ways the mirror room never could, and the outcome was far from certain, but the thought didn't make him turn back. It made him walk faster, because Daniel now understood that public speaking was not just about being heard. It was about standing in the fire and daring to speak anyway, and he was beginning to crave that fire. Chapter 5. The Test of Silence. The streets were quieter than usual that evening, the usual hum of the city replaced by the soft whisper of wind through alleyways. Daniel walked with his hands stuffed into his coat pockets, the envelope from Mr. C burning in his mind like a secret he wasn't ready to share. You will face an audience who doesn't want to listen. The words replayed over and over. When he arrived at the academy, the classroom was transformed. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, facing a small platform that looked more like a stage than before. The room was dimly lit, the overhead lights softened to make every shadow count. Tonight, Mr. C said, standing at the front, you will speak to the most dangerous audience of all, the silent one. People who won't respond, won't nod, won't smile. They will sit and watch and judge. They will test you. And if you fail, you will feel every second of it. Daniel swallowed. His throat felt tight. He had survived the mirror room, the first audience, but this was something else. The door opened, and one by one, students filed in. At first, they seemed ordinary. But as Daniel studied them, he realized that many of them were deliberately indifferent. Arms crossed, faces blank, eyes that refused to meet his. This was no ordinary practice class. This was a crucible. Go ahead, Mr. C said, gesturing toward the stage. Daniel stepped up, gripping the edge of the platform. He opened his mouth, and the words felt awkward, forced, like trying to squeeze water from a stone. He spoke of ambition, of mistakes, of lessons learned. But the audience remained still, not a single nod, not a single sign of engagement. Panic rose in his chest. They are not listening. They're judging. I'm failing. His voice wavered, and the tremor he thought he had conquered returned. Mr. C's voice cut through the tension. Stop speaking to them. Speak to yourself. Observe them. Learn what they resist, what they respond to, and then give them what they cannot refuse to notice. Daniel froze. Observe them? He looked around, really looked. One woman's eyes flickered at a small joke he had made. A man at the back leaned slightly forward at a story about a personal failure. Tiny reactions. Almost imperceptible. He realized then that the silence wasn't hostility. It was attention, hidden, cautious. The audience was waiting for a reason to believe, waiting for authenticity. Daniel took a deep breath. He spoke again, slower this time. He didn't chase their approval, he spoke deliberately, pausing at moments where emotion mattered, emphasizing the words that came from the heart. He told them about fear, about the nights he had doubted himself, about the courage it took just to stand there. The first small reaction came like a ripple. A faint nod. Then another. And another. By the end of his 5 minutes, a murmur of understanding passed through the room. Not loud, not exuberant, but genuine. They had been silent, yes, but now they were listening. Mr. C stepped forward, clapping slowly. Most speakers fail because they want applause. They want smiles. They want reassurance. You have learned the first rule of influence: people notice what they resist. Speak to that. And when you do, they will respond, even if quietly. Even if reluctantly. Daniel stepped down, drained but exhilarated. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the power of the connection he had created. For the first time, he realized that public speaking was not about performing. It was about sensing, reading, and responding. As he left the academy, the city seemed different. The streetlights glowed warmer, the distant hum of traffic softer, almost musical. He knew that every silent audience he would face in the future, in interviews, in meetings, in life, could be transformed if he learned to notice, to observe, and to speak not just words, but truth. But as he walked home, the thrill of victory was tempered by a new awareness. The challenge Mr. C had promised, the one he couldn't yet imagine, was waiting. And Daniel could feel it pressing on him, heavier than fear, sharper than doubt. Somewhere in the shadows of the city, the real test of courage was preparing itself. Chapter 6. The echo of doubt. The city felt heavier that morning. Daniel's steps echoed against the cracked pavement as if the buildings themselves were whispering warnings. The sun had barely risen, and already the streets seemed impatient, bustling with people who had places to be, lives to live, challenges to conquer. And here he was, walking toward the academy with a weight in his chest that no exercise, no practice, no speech could lift. He had spent the night replaying the silent audience over and over. He remembered every twitch of attention, every reluctant nod, every imperceptible sigh. He thought he had conquered fear, yet as the memories returned, doubt crept in like fog. Was it really courage, or just luck? Inside the academy, the hallway smelled of polished wood and old books. Mr. C was waiting at the end of the corridor, leaning against the stage rail with his usual calm expression. "Ah," he said as Daniel approached. "I see the shadow of doubt has found you. Good. That's the next lesson." Daniel frowned. "Doubt? I thought I was ready. I thought I was improving." Mr. C smiled, sharp and knowing. "Doubt doesn't mean failure. Doubt means growth. Fear of speaking is nothing. Fear of ourselves, that is the real challenge. Today, you will meet it." He led Daniel into a room that felt smaller than any classroom yet somehow suffocating in its intimacy. There were no mirrors, no stage, just a single chair in the middle of the floor and a ring of quiet observers, students from previous classes, older this time, sharper, their expressions unreadable. "Sit," Mr. C instructed. "And speak. Not to them. Not to me. To your doubts. Speak as if they are alive, as if they can answer, as if they will challenge every word you say." Daniel hesitated. The thought of talking to himself? To doubt? It sounded absurd. Yet the room, with its heavy silence and keen eyes, demanded something. He sat, hands clenched in his lap, and took a deep breath. "I am not enough," he began, the words trembling at first. "I am afraid. I am unprepared. People will notice. People will judge. I will fail. I always fail." The words felt like stones in his stomach, dragging him down. But he kept speaking, because the silence around him forced it out, and yet, he continued, voice stronger despite the tremble. "I am here. I am standing. I am speaking. And if I speak, if I continue, maybe, just maybe, I will be heard. Maybe I will matter more than my fear wants me to believe." For the first time, the observers stirred, not applauding, not nodding, not encouraging, but simply watching with intent. Their eyes were like mirrors without distortion. They reflected his truth back to him without judgment. The room felt alive. The echoes of his own words bounced off the walls, back to him, sharper, clearer. And with each repetition, the weight of doubt began to shift. It didn't vanish, it never would entirely, but it became something he could confront, something he could use. C stepped forward, his hands clasped. "The echo of doubt is a teacher," he said. "It tests your clarity, your honesty, your persistence. Most men flee when it whispers. You have learned to speak back. That is power." Daniel nodded, feeling a strange exhaustion that was also invigorating. He had faced himself in ways that mirrors and silent audiences could not replicate. He had faced the unspoken critic that lives inside everyone, the one that measures your worth before anyone else even notices you. As he walked out into the city streets again, the sun now higher, warmer, he felt a shift inside himself. He knew the next challenge was coming, a true test, where people would not only listen but resist, push back, even mock. And in that resistance, he would be forced to use everything he had learned: courage, honesty, observation, and the willingness to speak through fear. A sudden commotion drew his attention. Across the street, a small crowd had gathered around a speaker, someone addressing them from a raised platform, gesturing wildly. Daniel stopped, watching, and a shiver ran down his spine. The speaker's words were loud, but the reactions were mixed, some hostile, some skeptical. Daniel realized with a thrill and a pang of anxiety, this was the next step. The real world was waiting, full of resistance and scrutiny. And the man who wanted to succeed must do more than speak, he must reach hearts unwilling to listen. He turned back toward the academy, Mr. C's voice echoing in his mind. Courage is standing in the fire and daring to speak anyway. And somewhere in that echo, Daniel understood that fire would not wait for him to feel ready. It would test him. It would burn, and it would reveal whether he was truly capable of making his voice matter. Chapter 7, The Crucible of Skepticism. The morning air was thick with tension as Daniel stepped off the streetcar and onto the cobblestones of the old square. He had walked this path a dozen times before, but today, every step felt heavier, each echo against the stone buildings a drumbeat of warning. At the far end, a small crowd had gathered, chattering, shifting, skeptical eyes glinting in the weak sunlight. This was no classroom. No mirrors. No controlled audience of students who had come to learn. This was the city, raw and indifferent. People who had no reason to care about him, no reason to even listen, had assembled because he had been asked to speak. And they weren't waiting for inspiration, they were waiting to be unimpressed. C had given him only one instruction: observe. Adapt. Speak. Daniel's chest tightened. Observation was easy in a room of mirrors or polite students. Adaptation in the face of doubt and hostility, that was another matter entirely. He climbed the wooden platform, the boards creaking under his weight. Faces turned toward him, arms crossed, mouths set in lines of skepticism. A few laughed quietly. Others whispered among themselves, exchanging looks that said plainly, "Why is he here?" Daniel's palms went clammy. For a moment, he wanted to flee. He could feel the fear rising, coiling like a snake in his chest. But then he remembered the mirror room, the silent audience, the echo of doubt, all the moments he had faced himself and his fear and still stood. He took a deep breath and began. "I know many of you don't want to be here," he said, his voice shaking at first. "I know some of you think this is a waste of time. I know that some of you are waiting for me to fail." A few of them snickered, but Daniel pressed on. "And I understand. I know what it's like to be afraid of failing. I know what it's like to think your voice doesn't matter. I've been there." The snickers faded. The whispers slowed. Eyes flickered, searching for honesty in a speaker they hadn't expected to care. He told them small stories, a failure at a previous job, a misunderstanding that had taught him humility, a moment where fear had almost won and yet he had stood his ground anyway. His voice grew steadier, not with practiced polish but with raw conviction. Each word carried the weight of someone who had truly lived it, someone whose fear had been confronted and tamed just enough to speak. He noticed the subtle shifts first, a man leaning forward, fingers drumming against his knees. A young woman crossing her arms then uncrossing them. Someone at the back, frowning, then nodding slightly. Tiny, almost imperceptible signs, but they told him he was reaching them. Daniel paused, letting the silence linger. He didn't rush to fill it. He let them breathe in what he had said. And then he pressed on, asking questions, not rhetorically, but genuinely seeking their thoughts, their experiences. He made space for them to feel involved, to connect, to reflect. By the end, the laughter and whispers were gone. The crowd was attentive. Not all smiles, not all nods, but eyes that had begun to open, ears that had begun to listen. He had not just spoken. He had met resistance and turned it into attention. When he stepped down from the platform, his legs felt weak but alive. The city noises, the passing carts, the distant calls of vendors, they felt different now. Less oppressive. More alive, more attuned. Mr. C approached, calm as ever. "Most speakers flee when faced with resistance," he said. "You didn't. You adapted. You observed. You spoke. And you connected. That is how influence begins." Daniel nodded, exhausted, exhilarated, and terrified all at once. He realized that every hostile audience he would face in the future could break him, but it could also teach him more than any classroom ever could. As he walked home, the city seemed alive with possibilities and dangers alike. The lessons were no longer theoretical. Every street corner, every crowd, every conversation was a test, and he could feel it pressing on him like heat against the skin. He had survived the crucible of skepticism. But deep inside, he knew the next challenge would be even greater. A new kind of audience, a new kind of fear, was waiting, one that would demand more than courage, more than honesty, more than observation, and Daniel had a feeling that Mr. C's final lesson was approaching, the one that would decide whether all his practice, all his courage, and all his newfound skill would be enough to truly master the art of speaking. Chapter 8, The Voice That Persists. The auditorium smelled faintly of varnish and old carpeting, the kind of place where ambition and nerves gathered like static in the air. Daniel stood backstage, peering through the heavy velvet curtain at the rows of seats stretching farther than he had ever imagined. Hundreds of people. Real people. Not students. Not controlled audiences. Real, impatient, expectant eyes waiting for him to speak. His hands were clammy, his stomach twisting into knots. The lessons of the mirror room, the silent audience, and the skeptical crowd were all present in his mind, but here, they felt fragile against the enormity of the stage. He could hear the murmur of voices from the audience, the shuffling of papers, the faint coughs. Every sound reminded him of how small and exposed he was. Mr. C appeared beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Remember," he said quietly, "the voice is nothing without the heart. Speak to them, not to impress them. Speak so they feel. Speak so they see you. And above all, persist, even if they resist." Daniel nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He stepped onto the stage, the wooden floor creaking under his weight. The lights hit him, blinding at first, but he quickly adjusted, letting his eyes sweep across the audience, taking in the individuals rather than the crowd. Faces. Expressions. Postures. Tiny signs of engagement or disinterest. Every detail mattered. He began with a story, a personal one, humble and honest. He told them of a time when he had failed spectacularly, a moment when fear had nearly paralyzed him and humiliation seemed inevitable. He described his struggle vividly, the pounding of his heart, the shaking of his hands, the desperate wish to disappear. He didn't hide the fear, he owned it. He painted the scene with words so real that the audience leaned in unconsciously, drawn by the authenticity of someone brave enough to expose their vulnerability. As he spoke, Daniel noticed something he hadn't before, the subtle power of pacing, of silence, of letting a moment linger. When he paused after a particularly striking image, the audience filled the space with their attention. When he whispered a line, their eyes sharpened, drawn into the intimacy of his voice. He realized then that storytelling was not just words strung together, it was a bridge built with pauses, gestures, emotion, and presence. He told stories of triumph as well, small victories and moments of insight that came not from talent alone, but from persistence, observation, and courage. The stories were simple, yet each one carried weight. Each one invited the audience to step into his world, to see themselves in his struggles, to feel the possibility of their own courage. Halfway through, he felt a ripple of tension. Some audience members were frowning, skeptical again. But Daniel did not falter. He remembered Mr. C.'s words, observe. Adapt. Speak. He adjusted, shifting his tone, changing the rhythm, emphasizing the universal truths behind the personal anecdotes. Slowly, subtly, resistance softened into curiosity. Curiosity turned into engagement. Engagement turned into energy that radiated through the auditorium like heat. When he finally finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat, not the silence of dismissal, but the charged, expectant silence of people caught in the grip of a story. Then applause began, hesitant at first, then building, filling the space. Daniel's legs trembled beneath him, his chest heaving, but he remained standing, drinking in the warmth of acknowledgement. Mr. C appeared again at the side of the stage, his eyes gleaming. You see, he said softly. Persistence is the voice that touches hearts. Skill is nothing without it. Stories are the vessels of truth. You've begun to understand that tonight. Daniel stepped off the stage, shaking, exhilarated, terrified, and alive in a way he had never known. The city outside awaited, but inside him, a new world had opened, one where fear could be met, resistance could be navigated, and voices could carry far beyond expectation if they were spoken with truth and courage. As he left the auditorium, clutching his notes, Daniel felt a subtle shift. He understood now that mastery was not about perfection. It was about persistence, honesty, and connection. And yet, a quiet tension lingered in the back of his mind. The next challenge was approaching, one he could not fully imagine, one that would test everything he had learned, one that might demand more than courage alone, because speaking to those willing to listen was one thing, speaking to those who could change your life, or destroy it, was another. Chapter 9, The Shadow of Expectation. The city smelled of rain and asphalt, a sharp scent that made Daniel's chest tighten with anticipation. He walked briskly through narrow streets, each step echoing against the brick walls, carrying him closer to the building where his fate, or at least the test of his courage, awaited. Inside the lobby, the air was pristine, almost antiseptic, a world away from the warm, chaotic energy of the academy. Polished floors reflected the fluorescent lights above, and every step he took seemed louder than it should have been. The receptionist glanced at him and nodded curtly. They're ready for you. The elevator rose smoothly, too smoothly, carrying him upward with a weight in his stomach that refused to lift. When the doors opened, he stepped onto a hallway lined with glass walls, behind which people moved with quiet purpose, typing, whispering, walking with determined strides. His own reflection caught in the glass, and for a moment he paused, recalling the mirror room. This is real now, he thought. The stakes are higher. No rehearsal can save me. At the end of the corridor, a large door opened into a room where the light was slightly dim, but the presence of authority was heavy. Around a polished mahogany table, a group of executives sat, their eyes sharp, their posture rigid. Every glance he caught was a measurement of him, silent but undeniable. You may begin, said the woman at the head of the table. Her voice was calm, almost cold, but it carried the weight of expectation. Daniel stepped forward, his notes clutched in one hand but mostly ignored. They were guides, not shields. He inhaled deeply, feeling the familiar tremor that had accompanied him in every challenge up to this point. This time, though, it was different. The stakes were more than observation or applause. Success here could change his life. Failure could haunt him for far longer. He began cautiously, recounting small, personal experiences, moments of struggle, moments of quiet triumph, moments where fear had nearly held him back. He painted the scenes carefully, letting them feel the tension, the stakes, the humanity of it all. At first, the executives were impassive, nodding occasionally, making notes, exchanging subtle glances. But Daniel noticed it, the small reactions, the subtle shifts, the tiny sparks of connection that mirrored what he had learned in the silent and skeptical audiences. A lean forward. A brief smile. A quick narrowing of eyes at an unexpected point. Each microsignal told him something. He adapted. He changed his pacing, emphasized certain details, asked questions not to provoke, but to engage. He paused strategically, letting moments breathe, allowing the audience to process, to feel. With each adjustment, the room shifted imperceptibly. The weight of expectation eased, replaced by curiosity, and finally, by engagement. Halfway through, he hit a snag. One executive, tall and imposing, crossed his arms and leaned back, an expression of skepticism etched across his face. Daniel faltered for a heartbeat. The old fear returned, the fear of judgment, of failure, of not being enough. But then he remembered the echo of doubt, the lessons of the mirror room, the power of storytelling. He squared his shoulders, met the man's gaze, and continued, not with practiced words, but with authenticity. "I cannot promise perfection," he said, voice steadying as he spoke directly to the skeptical figure, "but I can promise truth. I can promise effort. I can promise that what I say comes from experience and understanding, not just rehearsed phrases. And if you choose to listen, I believe you will see that what I offer is real." A silence followed, sharp and heavy. Daniel held it. The room leaned in, almost imperceptibly, drawn by the weight of honesty. Then, slowly, one executive nodded. Another followed. And finally, the skepticism that had been a wall began to crumble, brick by brick, replaced by attention, curiosity, and, just barely, respect. When he finished, Daniel stepped back, legs trembling, chest tight, sweat prickling his brow. The room remained quiet for a heartbeat longer, then applause, restrained, deliberate, but meaningful, filled the space. CS voice echoed in his memory, "Observe. Adapt. Speak." Daniel had done all three under pressure greater than any he had faced before. And yet, as he walked back through the hallway, past the polished floors and glass walls, he felt a new tension rising, deeper and more insistent than before, because success, he realized, was not the end. It was only proof of possibility. The next step, the one that would test the mastery of every skill he had learned, was still waiting, somewhere beyond the walls of comfort, beyond applause, beyond approval, and Daniel, for the first time, understood that to truly master speaking, to make every word matter, he would have to confront not just audiences or fear, but the shadows of expectation themselves, the ones that live inside, whispering, "Are you enough?" Chapter 10, The Weight of Eyes. The theater smelled of dust and varnish, old and familiar, yet its vastness made Daniel feel suddenly tiny. Rows of seats stretched into shadows, every one of them waiting, expectant, heavy with eyes that could see through pretense. This was no practice room, no polite audience, no small academy class. This was real. And real, Daniel knew, would not forgive hesitation. He stood backstage, his hands trembling despite hours of preparation. The chatter of the crowd drifted to him, muffled but persistent, a constant reminder of the stakes. He could feel the weight of every gaze he would face soon, the anticipation, the judgment, the curiosity, the silent impatience. C appeared beside him, leaning casually against the curtain, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. "They're waiting," he said softly. "But remember, Daniel, they are not the danger. The danger is the distance you put between your words and your heart. Close it. Feel them, and they will feel you." Daniel swallowed and nodded. He knew this was true, yet the magnitude of the room pressed down like a physical weight. He stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding, but he had learned to see beyond them. He scanned the audience, taking in faces, postures, subtle movements, tiny signals that revealed interest or resistance. He began cautiously, recounting a story from his past, a failure that had stung deeply, one that left a scar he had hidden from almost everyone. He spoke not to impress, not to entertain, but to invite. Every pause was deliberate, every inflection chosen to carry the weight of honesty, every gesture grounded in authenticity. At first, the audience remained still. Some whispered to each other. Some folded their arms. But Daniel had learned to observe, to notice the sparks that others missed. One man leaned forward slightly. A young woman's fingers drummed softly against her notebook. Eyes flickered, searching, questioning. He adjusted. Not to appease, but to meet them where they were. He slowed his pacing, emphasized the truth behind the story rather than the story itself, and allowed moments of silence to speak louder than words. Gradually, resistance softened. Curiosity grew. And finally, attention sharpened like a blade. Halfway through, a challenge arrived in the form of a loud, skeptical voice from the back. Why should we care? The question cut through the room like a knife. Daniel froze for a heartbeat, then remembered Mr. C.'s lessons: observe, adapt, speak. He met the voice with eye contact, acknowledging it rather than ignoring it. Because I am telling you what I have lived, he said calmly. Not what I think you want to hear. Not what sounds impressive. But what is real. And if you listen, you may find your own truth reflected in it. A silence fell, thick and tense. Daniel held it, heart hammering, every fiber of him alert. Then, imperceptibly at first, heads began to nod. One by one, engagement replaced skepticism. The room leaned forward, drawn by the courage in the words, the honesty in the voice, the human connection Daniel had cultivated in that moment. By the time he finished, the applause was thunderous, filling the theater like a storm breaking. Daniel's legs shook, his chest heaving, and yet he remained standing, drinking in the energy of connection he had earned through courage and observation. C stepped onto the stage beside him, eyes gleaming. Most speakers never reach this point, he said. Most retreat when faced with doubt, resistance, or silence. You have faced all three and persisted. That is the essence of influence, not speaking well, but speaking truly, and persisting until your voice is felt. As Daniel left the theater, the city outside seemed transformed. The streets hummed with possibility, each face in the crowd a potential audience, each conversation an opportunity to practice, to connect, to persist, and yet, a quiet tension lingered. Even as he reveled in his success, Daniel knew that mastery was not a destination. The real lessons, the ones that would test every skill he had learned, were still ahead. There were voices he had not yet reached, challenges he had not yet faced, and fears he had not yet conquered. The weight of eyes, he realized, was not only in others. It was in himself, in the standards he set, in the courage he demanded of his own heart. And as he walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, he understood that the final test, the one that would prove whether he had truly mastered the art of speaking, was approaching, and nothing could prepare him fully for what it would demand. Chapter 11. The moment of truth. The night was heavy, the city bathed in a soft fog that blurred streetlights into halos of pale gold. Daniel walked toward the grand hall, each step echoing like a drumbeat of destiny. Tonight was not a practice, not a classroom exercise, not a controlled audience. Tonight was the culmination, the moment of truth. The hall itself was imposing, a cavernous space with high ceilings, dark wood panels, and rows upon rows of seats stretching farther than his eyes could reach. Hundreds of people had gathered, some curious, some impatient, some skeptical, and some powerful enough to make or break his future. The air buzzed with expectation, thick and almost suffocating. Backstage, Daniel could feel his heart hammering. His palms were slick, his stomach a knot of nerves. He closed his eyes, taking in every lesson he had learned: the mirror room, the silent audience, the skeptical crowd, the high-pressure theater. Every story he had told, every pause, every observation, every moment of courage had led to this. Mr. C appeared beside him, calm as always, a steady presence in the storm. Tonight, he said softly, you will not only speak, you will stand in the fire. The audience may resist, they may judge, they may doubt. But remember, your voice carries truth, and truth persists. Trust it. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. He walked onto the stage, the bright lights blinding, the eyes of the crowd 1,000 knives. The weight of all those expectations pressed down on him. He felt small, exposed, vulnerable. He began at first, his voice was hesitant, trembling like a leaf in the wind. He spoke of fear, of failure, of the nights he had doubted himself. He did not hide his uncertainty, he embraced it, letting it flow into his words. The audience reacted, some leaning back, skeptical, some leaning forward, curious. Then, he told a story of persistence, of rising despite obstacles, of learning from every failure. He painted each scene vividly: the cold streets, the empty conference rooms, the mirror room reflections, the silent audiences, the skeptical crowd, the high-pressure theater. Each image carried weight. Each word carried emotion. He noticed subtle reactions, a furrowed brow here, a nod there, a quiet intake of breath from someone near the back. He adjusted, not to pander, but to meet them where they were. He slowed at the right moments, emphasized honesty, and allowed silence to punctuate the tension. Halfway through, a man at the edge of the front row called out, questioning his credibility, challenging his stories. Daniel froze for a heartbeat. Every instinct screamed to retreat. But then he remembered the lessons of observation and adaptation. He met the man's gaze and spoke directly to him. I am not here to impress you. I am here to speak truth. And if you listen, you may find that what I say comes from real experience, not rehearsed words. You may not agree, but you will understand. The man's frown remained, but the sharpness of his gaze softened. The audience shifted, leaning in, caught by the courage of a man speaking despite fear, despite challenge. Daniel felt a surge of energy. The words flowed easier now, stronger, carrying resonance he had never experienced before. By the end, the hall was silent for a heartbeat, suspended in tension, and then erupted into applause, not polite, not obligatory, but powerful, overwhelming, transformative. Daniel's chest heaved. His legs trembled, but he stood, rooted by the truth he had dared to speak. Mr. C appeared beside him once more, eyes gleaming. You have faced fear, doubt, skepticism, and expectation, he said. You have spoken through them all. That is mastery, Daniel. Not perfection, not applause, but courage that persists, and a voice that carries truth. As Daniel stepped off the stage, the fog outside seemed lighter, the city quieter, as if holding its breath in respect. He knew that speaking was no longer merely about being heard. It was about connecting, influencing, daring, and persisting. And yet, even in triumph, a subtle tension lingered. There were still voices he had yet to reach, moments he had yet to master, fears he had yet to face. But for the first time, he understood that mastery was not a destination, it was the willingness to stand, to speak, and to persist, no matter the pressure, no matter the audience, no matter the moment. Daniel walked into the night, his voice alive in his chest, echoing with the courage of a man who had learned that speaking was never just about words. It was about heart, presence, and the bravery to face everything that opposed him. And somewhere, in the quiet of the foggy city, he knew the final lesson was near, the one that would test not just skill, but the very essence of who he was becoming. Chapter 12. The art fully realized. The morning air was crisp, almost electric, carrying a strange sense of promise. Daniel walked through the streets with a calm he had never known, though his heart still pulsed with anticipation. Today was different. Today was not about practice, not about preparation, not about small victories. Today was the culmination of every lesson, every fear confronted, every reflection faced. The hall was vast, more magnificent than any Daniel had ever entered. High ceilings arched above him, ornate chandeliers spilling golden light, and rows upon rows of seats stretched like an endless ocean of expectation. People had come from every corner, students, skeptics, professionals, strangers, all waiting, all watching, all ready to test him. Backstage, Mr. C appeared, leaning against the curtain, his eyes sharp yet encouraging. This is it, he said. Every mirror you faced, every silence you endured, every skeptical gaze, every doubt, it all leads here. Speak as yourself. Speak as the man you have become. And remember, the art is not in perfection, but in presence. Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of all he had learned. The fire in his chest was no longer fear. It was purpose. Courage no longer trembled, it surged. He stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding, the audience immense, and for a heartbeat, he felt the old panic stir. But he did not flee. He did not falter. He remembered every challenge, every lesson, every reflection he had faced. He began softly, telling a story that was both personal and universal, of doubt, struggle, and the quiet moments that had shaped him. His voice carried the honesty of someone who had faced fear and spoken anyway. Each word, each pause, each gesture was deliberate, yet natural. He was not performing. He was inviting, guiding, connecting. The audience leaned in. They whispered, nodded, smiled subtly. Some faces were still skeptical, but Daniel knew to read them, to reach them where they were. When resistance appeared, he adapted, shifting tone, emphasizing truth, allowing pauses to speak louder than words. By the time he reached the heart of his story, he had touched them all, skeptics, doubters, silent observers, because he spoke not to impress, but to resonate. He told stories of failures turned lessons, of moments of fear overcome by courage, of persistence when hope seemed distant. And with every story, the audience followed, carried along by the authenticity and power of his voice. They laughed, they nodded, they breathed with him, not as a performance, but as shared experience. Halfway through, a young man in the back whispered a challenge, questioning his authority, his experience. Daniel met the gaze directly. He did not flinch. I do not ask you to believe me, he said. I ask you to witness the truth I carry. And if you listen, you may find your own strength reflected in it. A pause. Then, a subtle nod. Another. A ripple of understanding spread through the audience. Resistance melted into engagement, curiosity into inspiration, doubt into possibility. Daniel realized that the power of speaking was not in the words alone, but in the courage to speak them, to meet resistance, to persist. When he finished, the hall erupted, not with polite applause, not with hollow approval, but with genuine, resounding recognition. Daniel stood, legs trembling, heart racing, not from fear, but from the thrill of connection, of influence, of presence fully realized. Mr. C appeared beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "You have learned what most never do," he said. "Courage. Observation. Adaptation. Persistence. Presence. You have mastered the art not by memorizing words, but by living them. That is the true power of speaking. That is influence." Daniel stepped off the stage, the applause washing over him like a tide. He felt a profound calm beneath the exhilaration. He knew now that speaking was not about approval, not about perfection, not about fearlessness. It was about honesty, courage, presence, and the willingness to persist, no matter the audience, no matter the stakes. As he walked into the city streets, the sunlight glinting off wet pavement, Daniel realized something profound: the journey did not end here. Every street, every crowd, every conversation was another stage, another opportunity to practice, to connect, to influence. And he would face them all with the confidence of a man who had seen the fire, stared into it, and spoken anyway. The city hummed with possibility. The echoes of his voice lingered in the corners, in the quiet moments, in the reflections he would meet every day. Daniel had learned that the art of speaking was never truly finished, because it was not about speaking perfectly, it was about daring to speak at all, and daring to make every word count. And in that realization, he smiled, feeling the fullness of his own voice at last. That's it for today's journey on Momentum Mind. If this story sparked something in you, imagine what the next one could do. Which audiobook or self-development journey should we explore next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below, we read them all, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could shift your mindset and fuel your momentum. Remember, momentum starts with the first step, and you just took it today.